Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Thursday Thoughts segment when we talk a little bit more about the gospel we just read on Sunday and look forward to the next one on the Sunday to come. In this last Sunday, we talked about Jesus turning over the tables of the money changers in the temple, and we actually said that it's not just money that he was upset with, but instead, anytime we make God's love and salvation an economic exchange where both parties give something and try to extract value from the other, we have gone wrong, and God gets kind of upset about that. Now, we mentioned on Sunday that some of the ways we can do this by setting up a code of morality that everybody has to adhere to, or setting up a tradition, or even in some ways we have to be careful about our creeds and our beliefs and what have you. When we say people who don't think like us don't have it right, we presume that we have it right, and none of us does. And God doesn't love us or save us because we're so good or we've got it right. Instead, God does that because God loves us. Now today, I want you to think about and be aware of the one nearly infallible sign that you are starting to engage in exactly this kind of economic exchange that makes Jesus upset. It is this: anytime you do faith in such a way that you think is going to bring you power. Now, that power could be to influence other people, to have an increase in status, to get saved, to whatever it is. If you are conducting faith in a way that brings you power, you had better be very careful, because you are starting to engage in an economic exchange. And the church has been full of this throughout the years, especially the years I've been in ministry. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people say, we've got to go out there and convert non-believers into believers, or we've got to expand the influence of the church, or we've got to convince more people to come here, or we've got to change the world so that people think right, or we've got to get God and the Ten Commandments back in schools, or whatever it is that we think is going to advantage us and our point of view. That assumes that we know what's right, that it's good for all the people around us without ever having seen or talked to them, and that our expansion is God's goal. We end up trading salvation, love, faith, whatever you want to call it, for a sense that we are doing something that empowers us, except we don't call it empowering us, we call it empowering God. And that harkens back to the oldest sin in the book, which is the sin of idolatry, the sin of assuming that we are God and that God thinks just like us. And what happens to us is the critical factor in determining our place in salvation and whether or not God has a relationship with us. That is patently untrue. And if you rewind in your mind, a lot of the presumption that churches, or us personally, that we've made about faith, we're going to find the trappings of power and self-advantage in almost all of them. It's really, really hard to get over this. It's like asking people to see with eyes other than their own. And frankly, I don't think we can do this on our own, because if we sat down to plan a church or a church program or whatever it is, just with us, we're going to plan it like we plan it in ways that we think are powerful and advantageous, and therein we fell into the trap. The only way to get over this idea of trading God's salvation for acceptance or morality or whatever it is to stop, take a breath, and listen to people who aren't us. To give them not salvation, but the power to talk about and process and interpret what love and faith and salvation are. That goes against the grain of what the church is taught, which is to say, when you become knowledgeable and indoctrinated, then you're able to talk about God. But it is exactly what we need to do in order to avoid this trap. So the critical question to ask then, not what we think is right, not what expands our point of view, not what brings us power, but rather, did I invite someone else to the table? Did I talk to someone else who isn't a part of this system and who doesn't have a horse in the race or an advantage to be gained here, or at least has a different advantage than mine, so that I'm pretty sure that I'm not just selling this for my currency, but instead we're finding something in between us that is faithful rather than is an economic exchange. If we ask that question and we take that seriously, we will be a lot closer to doing what God asks of us in this vein, and a lot closer to having the temple or church or community of faith that we are meant to have in God's love. That's the end of John chapter 2 for us. Next week, we'll look at Nicodemus in John chapter 3 and hear how Jesus talked to one of the people who is steeped in that tradition, but also had room to grow. Until then, we'll see you on Sunday.